I was 63 the day my daughter told me, straight-faced, "Mom, it's too late for you to start over." She said it like she was offering me mercy, like she was protecting me from embarrassment. I smiled politely, but something inside me cracked open because I wasn't asking for permission. I was asking to be seen. I had just enrolled in a college course, my first, after a lifetime of cooking dinners, folding laundry, being just mom. It was psychology. A dream I'd buried so deep under years of silence, I'd nearly forgotten it had a name. When I told my son, he laughed. "What are you going to do, counsel grandmas with tea and cookies?" That laugh? I still hear it at night sometimes. Not because it hurt, though it did, but because it was the moment I decided I would show them who I am. Even if it took me 10 more years, even if they never clapped, even if I had to do it alone. What they didn't understand is that when a woman has been invisible her whole life, and suddenly she realizes she doesn't need anyone's permission to exist, there is no stopping her. I was born in Bakersfield, California, in the summer of 1959. The kind of town where women were expected to be sweet, quiet, and useful. My name was Eleanor Vasquez, but back then, no one really used it. They just called me Ellie, or Tom's girl. I got married at 19. I didn't know what I wanted. I just knew I didn't want to be a burden. That's how girls like me were raised. Be agreeable, be grateful, be small. By 21, I had 2 children. Emily came first, bold and loud from the beginning. Luca followed, softer, always clutching the edge of my dress like he was afraid the world would pull me away from him. I loved being their mother. I loved folding their clothes, making pancakes shaped like animals, braiding Emily's hair before school. But as the years passed, I began to notice something strange. No one asked me how I was doing. They asked where their shoes were, what was for dinner, if I could pick up dry cleaning or watch the kids. But never, not once, did anyone ask, "Eleanor, are you happy?" I remember one night, sitting at the kitchen table after everyone was asleep. My hands were raw from scrubbing floors. I opened a magazine and saw an article titled, "What Would You Do If You Weren't Afraid?" And I thought, I'd study the mind, psychology. I wanted to understand why people hurt each other, why love sometimes looks like silence, why women disappear in their own homes, but dreams don't grow well in kitchens. So I folded the magazine, threw it away, and went to bed. For the next 40 years, I was someone else's idea of a good woman, a good wife, a good mother. I smiled, I served, I stayed small. But deep down, the question never left me. What would I do if I weren't afraid? Thomas, my husband, was the kind of man who thrived in public. At church, at barbecues, at company parties, he'd wrap his arm around me and say, "This here is the engine of our home." People would smile. I would smile too. But engines don't get flowers. They don't get rest. They just run until they break. At home, he barely looked up from the TV. He'd say things like, "You're lucky you don't have to work," while I folded his socks and cleaned up the kids' plates. I did work. I worked from the moment I woke up to the second my head hit the pillow. But mine didn't come with paychecks or thank yous. Emily grew up fast. She was sharp-tongued and impatient, like her father. By 16, she'd already outgrown me. "You wouldn't understand, Mom. You've never had a real job." I wanted to tell her I'd built her entire life with my bare hands, but I stayed quiet. Luca was gentler, but distracted. When I asked him to stay for dinner one night after college started, he said, "I've got plans with friends. You don't need me here every time." He was right. I didn't need him, I just missed him. As they grew older, they looked at me like I was stuck in time, like I'd chosen this life, and they were determined to escape it. When I mentioned I was thinking of taking a class, just one at the community center, Thomas scoffed. At your age, you should be taking yoga, not trying to reinvent the wheel. I laughed along, because that's what I always did. But that night, lying in bed next to a man who hadn't asked how I was in decades, I realized something. They didn't see me as a woman, they saw me as a function, the cook, the maid, the background noise. And the more I gave, the more they forgot I was ever someone to begin with. It happened quietly. There was no big fight, no screaming in the kitchen, no suitcase thrown out the door, just a Thursday morning in April. I was making scrambled eggs when Thomas walked in and said, "I think I want something different." I laughed. I thought he meant breakfast. But then he added, "No, I mean in life." He'd met someone, a woman named Krista, 42, divorced. "She makes me feel young again," he said, like I was a pair of old shoes he'd outgrown. I stood there, spatula in hand, watching the eggs burn. He didn't cry. He didn't beg. He packed 2 suitcases and left the next day. Emily called me later that week. I thought she'd be furious on my behalf. Instead, she said, "Mom, maybe this is a chance for you to finally move on too." Move on from what? From a life I built, alone for all of them? From a marriage I carried on my back for 43 years? Luca didn't even call. He sent a short text. "He's still our dad. Try to keep it civil." I wasn't surprised. Disappointed, yes, but not surprised. When I found the credit card statement months later with gifts, restaurants, hotel rooms dating back over a year, I didn't cry. I sat on the couch, no TV, no music, and I finally said it out loud. They never saw me. It was like hearing someone else speak, a ghost of the woman I used to be. That night I didn't sleep. I sat up and made a list, not of groceries, not of chores, but of things I had forgotten I wanted. Learn about the human mind, finish a book, take a class, matter to myself. It was the first time I wrote something just for me in over 30 years. And it was the first night I felt the ember of something I thought had died, desire. Not for revenge, not even for love, but for a life that belonged to me, and me alone. It started with a flyer. I found it tucked under my apartment door, half crumpled, probably meant for someone else. Adult education. Community college enrollment now open. No age limit. I stood there holding it like it was a relic from another life. Psychology 101 was listed right at the top. I hadn't said the word psychology out loud in decades, but there it was, my old dream, printed in black ink on recycled paper. My hands trembled as I dialed the number. A young voice answered, cheerful and indifferent. "No, ma'am, there's no age limit. You're welcome to enroll." I hung up and cried right there in the kitchen. Not from sadness, from terror. Because what if they were right? What if it really was too late? The next day, I went down to the school. I wore a blazer that hadn't fit right since the 90s. My palms were sweating. The classroom smelled like whiteboard markers and coffee. The students looked like children. I found a seat in the back and tried not to take up too much space. The professor, a woman no older than my daughter, opened the class with these words. "Dreamers never retire. They just get quieter until someone listens." Something inside me broke open. For the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. I felt like maybe I had just begun. The assignments were hard. I didn't understand half the terms. I had to reread every paragraph twice, but I stayed. I studied at night, flashcards spread across the kitchen table. I watched lectures 3 times. I underlined everything. When I got a C+ on my first test, I cried again. Not because it was low, but because it was mine. I had earned it. Thomas didn't call, Emily didn't ask, Luca didn't care, but I cared. And something strange started to happen. I stopped asking if I was wasting my time. I started asking what else I could do. When Emily found out I was taking classes, she laughed. Not a soft laugh, a sharp, amused, dismissive one, like I'd just told her I was joining the circus. "Mom, you're in your 60s. What's the point?" I told her I was studying psychology, that I wanted to understand the mind, trauma, behavior, even just for myself. She shook her head. "You're not a therapist. You're a retired housewife. Don't embarrass yourself." Luca didn't laugh. He looked confused, almost concerned. "Are you lonely, Mom? Is this about Dad?" They didn't get it. They thought I was chasing attention, some kind of identity crisis. They didn't see the woman who was finally meeting herself for the first time. At school, I felt out of place every day. I was older than most of my professors. Students would sit away from me in group work, like I reminded them of their mothers or their grandmothers. Once I heard a boy whisper, "She's probably here for fun or something," like life experience points. That night I studied until 3 in the morning, not to prove them wrong, but because I had finally remembered what it felt like to want something for no one else but me. I started getting A's. Professors began calling on me more. One even asked if I'd consider tutoring another student, an honor student no less. At home I kept it quiet. There was no one to share it with. The kitchen was still empty, the phone still silent. But now the silence didn't sting. It cleared space for focus. I bought a small desk. I filled it with index cards, highlighters, books. It became my sanctuary. And every time I felt doubt creeping in, I'd whisper to myself, "They called you a dreamer. Now show them what a dreamer can become." Her name was Mariah. She walked into class on a rainy Tuesday, carrying a red umbrella and a black leather notebook. She had silver curls, sharp eyes, and a walk that said, "I don't care what anyone thinks anymore." She sat next to me without hesitation. "Mind if I join you?" Her voice was warm, unapologetic, like she belonged. I nodded, surprised. Most people avoided sitting too close. That day, we worked in pairs. We introduced ourselves. Me, nervously. Her, like she was telling an old story. Widowed twice. Raised 4 kids. Worked in a bakery for 30 years. Now I want to understand why I stayed so long with men who couldn't love a whole woman. I smiled. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't the only one rewriting her ending. From that day on, we studied together in the library every Thursday. She'd bring black coffee and tell me about her granddaughter who wanted to be a pilot. I'd share the latest passive-aggressive comment from Emily. We laughed more than we studied. She became my mirror, proof that I wasn't foolish for trying. One night I confessed to her that I wanted to go further, not just take classes, but finish a degree, maybe even apply for a master's someday. Mariah didn't flinch. She leaned back, crossed her arms, and said, "Why stop at a master's? Go get your doctorate, Eleanor. Let them choke on your title." I laughed, but she didn't. She meant it. She saw something in me I hadn't dared say out loud. We made a pact, right there at a plastic table in the college cafeteria. Doctorate or bust. And in that moment, surrounded by teenage chatter and vending machine hums, I realized something. Maybe the world wouldn't celebrate women like us, but we could celebrate each other loudly, proudly, and without apology. I was 71 years old the day I defended my dissertation. 3 professors sat across from me in a quiet room that smelled like dry ink and nerves. I wore a navy blazer I'd bought secondhand. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of everything I'd carried to get here. I spoke for 40 minutes, about grief, about generational silence, about the psychology of abandonment. I told stories without naming names, about mothers erased by duty, about women like me and Mariah, and the ones we'd watched fade into nothing because no one ever asked what they dreamed of becoming. When I finished, there was silence. Then a professor looked up and said, "Congratulations, Dr. Vasquez." And just like that, it was real. The title didn't change my heart, but it changed how I saw myself. Not as mom, not as Tom's ex-wife, not even as the old lady who went back to school, but as a woman who had finally owned her name. I went home, framed the degree, and hung it above the kitchen table, right where the family portraits used to be. Not out of bitterness, but because for the first time in my life, I had chosen to honor myself. Mariah cried when I told her she hadn't made it. Her cancer had come back that spring, but she made me promise. Wear that title like armor. You earned every letter. So I did. When I walked across that graduation stage, no one from my family was in the audience. No daughter with flowers, no son with a proud smile, no applause from the people who once told me I was wasting my time. But I walked anyway, because some moments aren't for anyone else to witness. Some victories are meant to be felt in the quiet, when you finally remember who you were before the world told you to forget. It started with a message from Emily. After 5 years of silence, no birthday calls, no visits, not even a congrats when I graduated, there it was. A short text. "Mom, can we talk?" I stared at the screen for a long time. My first instinct was to answer immediately. Old reflex. The need to be available, forgiving, soft. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I waited 2 days. When I finally responded, I simply said, "I'm available Friday between 5 and 6. Please don't bring drama." That Friday, it rained hard. At 5:17, I heard the knock. I opened the door slowly. Emily stood there, drenched, mascara running, holding a purse like it was the only thing holding her together. "He left me," she said. "He took everything. I didn't know where else to go." I nodded and let her in, not because she deserved it, but because I wanted to see her face when she realized I didn't need her anymore. She looked around the apartment. Framed degree, books stacked neatly, plants by the window. My world, small, quiet, and completely mine. "I didn't know you'd become this," she whispered. I served tea, sat down. She cried, told me she felt lost, that she didn't know who she was without him. I listened quietly. She waited for me to say something comforting, to fold myself into that old role, mother, fixer, soft place to fall. But I didn't. "It's strange, isn't it?" I said finally. "You're looking for a version of me that you once told wasn't real." She looked up, startled. I wasn't cruel, I wasn't angry, but I was no longer begging. That night, after she left, I stood by the window and watched her car disappear into the streetlight blur, and I felt nothing but peace. It wasn't revenge, not exactly, but there's something unshakable about letting someone back into your life and choosing not to shrink for them. Word got around. I don't know how exactly. Maybe Emily told someone. Maybe someone from the college shared a photo. All I know is suddenly, people who had ignored me for years started appearing. Luca called, said he heard I had opened a small counseling office downtown. "Wow, didn't expect you to go that far with it," he said, as if I'd won a raffle instead of surviving a war. He asked if I could recommend someone for his wife. She'd been struggling with anxiety. I gave him the name of a colleague, not out of spite, but because I had boundaries now. Thomas sent an email, just one line. "Congratulations on your degree. Hope you're well." I didn't reply. It's not that I was bitter. I was simply done performing grief for people who never stayed for the second act. My days were quiet but full. I saw clients. I took walks by the sea. I spent Sundays with a book and a fresh pot of coffee. Sometimes I'd get letters from former classmates, young women I'd mentored, saying things like, "You made me believe it wasn't too late to become someone new." And I realized this was it. This was the real applause. Not from family dinners, not from hollow apologies. but from knowing I had planted something in this world that would keep growing after me. One morning, Emily returned. She brought Mia, my granddaughter I'd barely known. Mia hugged me like she already understood. She pointed at the degree on the wall and said, "Are you a real doctor?" I smiled. "Yes, I am." Emily sat quietly watching. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not in size, but in certainty. Before she left, she said, "I'm sorry for everything." I looked her in the eye. "I know." Then I turned to Mia. "Come back anytime, sweetheart. I'll teach you how to listen, really listen." And as they walked away, I didn't feel like I'd won. I felt like I'd returned to the person I'd always been before life shrank me. They called me a dreamer like it was an insult, as if dreaming past a certain age is a kind of madness, as if wanting more after motherhood, after heartbreak, after being forgotten, was embarrassing. But here's what they didn't understand. Dreamers are dangerous because once they wake up, they never go back to sleep. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't beg for love. I didn't demand respect. I simply built a life so solid, so grounded, so true to myself, that the silence around me had no choice but to listen. They'll never know what it cost. They'll never see the nights I cried on a pile of books, or the mornings I doubted everything and still showed up anyway. But that's the thing about silent victories. They don't need witnesses to matter. I don't need to be remembered as the mother who cooked or the wife who endured. I'll be remembered, if at all, as the woman who refused to vanish. Not with noise, not with revenge, just with presence. And a name on the wall that says Dr. Eleanor Vasquez. Not for them, not to prove anything, but to finally answer the question I asked myself all those years ago. What would you do if you weren't afraid? This. I would do exactly this.